Welcome to Heart of Poland. Our normal studio is out of action today, but no matter, we've come to Business Link Astoria in the heart of Warsaw, and we are speaking to Daniel Tillis. Daniel is a professor at Jagiellonian University, but more importantly, he is also one of the co-editors of the popular Notes from Poland blog. Let's talk to him about his life here in Poland. Daniel, welcome to the studio. Welcome to our temporary studio, actually, because you're not in the home of Heart of Poland, but I guess that means that this is a special episode. Now,
thank you for having me.
Should I introduce you as Daniel from Notes from Poland or Daniel the Professor? Which one is the hat that you most like to wear?
I balance the two. I mean, I suppose probably from today's perspective, it's Notes from Poland because that's the most relevant to you and your audience. My main job is as a historian, but of British history. So the work I do for Notes from Poland, commenting on Polish affairs, reporting on the news, is probably more relevant.
I almost thought you were going to say more interesting.
No.
But, let's talk about your personal history. So you actually have Polish roots.
Yeah. So my family have their roots in Poland. We have my dad's much better at this than I am, tracing the family history. We have a family tree going back to the 17th century. That's as far as we've got so far. But I was born in the UK, so my grandfather was part of the exodus that took place at the start of the Second World War, managed to escape Poland. My grandmother, they hadn't met before the war, they met after the war, survived in Poland. Then they met afterwards and decided to leave Poland and settle abroad.
And how Polish was your childhood?
Actually, not very Polish at all. So in the sense that one half of my family are Polish, my father's side, but my mum's side of the family are actually, my mum's from Finland actually, so it's a very mixed, unusual combination.
That is rather, do you speak Finnish?
It was actually my first language I spoke growing up, so until the age of 4, Finnish was my first language growing up in London. But then I went to school, my mum went back to work, my dad didn't speak a word of the language, so it disappeared.
Finland, Poland, England. It's like a holy trinity of different countries. So were your grandparents kind of from that type of that particular type who kind of wanted to put this painful experience behind them? Because there is that particular, from that generation. Yeah,
so absolutely, in the sense that, for example, my grandfather managed to avoid being in occupied Poland during the war. My grandmother was here all the time, and she never spoke about her experiences afterwards to my father, to anyone else. We heard little bits and pieces of the story from friends and family, but she herself never wanted to talk about it. And she passed away when I was about 11 or 12 years old, so I wasn't really old enough ever to be interested enough to ask her about it. So they were still very much Polish, so my dad grew up with Polish being spoken at home, and I remember growing up and hearing Polish being spoken a lot by my grandparents, but it wasn't a very Polish upbringing in the sense I didn't learn the language.
Saturday school?
No, yeah, so none of that.
Those kind of things. Okay, so what prompted you to come to Poland? And I'm very interested in how you've become more Polish over that time, because it does seep in.
Yeah.
2004 when you moved here.
2004, yeah, and it was a really interesting time to come because, I mean, I moved here in September 2004, so it was just, 3 or 4 months after Poland joined the European Union, so this was the time of huge change in Poland, and so in the 15 years since then, we've just seen massive changes taking place all around. But I always felt a connection to Poland. I had visited here a couple of times in my childhood, and I came once when I was at university as well, when I was about 20. And then when I finished my undergraduate degree in the UK, I was looking to do a master's abroad somewhere and looking at various European countries, the options available, and I found a master's degree taught in English at the Jagiellonian University in Krakow, and so I decided that looked interesting. Krakow is my kind of ancestral city. That's where my family came from on my dad's side. So decided to take the jump and move to Poland.
You have a slightly gravelly voice. I don't know if everyone knows it. Is that from the smog in Krakow, which is obviously worse?
It's a good question. Well, yeah, it's a combination. I've been suffering, as I was saying to you before, I've been suffering from a virus for the last few weeks, which has been going around Krakow. But yeah, the smog certainly doesn't help. So I mean, here in Warsaw, you've had a few problems with smog, but nothing like compared to what we have down in Krakow.
I think we're about to go into that dangerous Krakow versus Warsaw.
Yeah, we've got the proper smog in Krakow. You don't really look at it.
Yeah, we're latecomers to the smog issue, but unfortunately we're making up for lost time. Okay, so what did Poland look like? I mean, you know, those were the days, at least, when it was still a little bit wild. It was still a crazy decision. Presumably a few people said, what the hell are you doing? Yeah. It's not like Polish universities are renowned. Obviously, Jagiellonian University is one of the best. You know, did you have some pressure to go elsewhere? Finland may be more attractive?
I did look at Finland as well, actually, but no, I mean, there was never pressure or criticism, but it was an unusual decision. I mean, to come to Poland to study at a Polish university, and certainly, yeah, when I came, it was a different place. Poland was much less international, less developed than it is now, and yeah, it's still, I don't want to say wild, because it wasn't wild. And when we first arrived on the course I was studying, they gave us a whole talk about culture shock, about how to adapt. But actually, I mean, you're just moving from one European country to another, and living in a big city like Krakow, it wasn't dramatically different, but certainly you do see the change over time. And certainly when I studied, it was a sort of motley collection of different people on the course from different corners of the world with different history. It was a really interesting experience generally to see this collection of people from all corners of the world coming together to study in Krakow. And one of the things we were warned about, actually in that same lecture when we were being taught about cultural differences, we were told that Krakow is like a trap, that once you're there it's very hard to escape. 15 years later, I'm still there. I managed to escape for 3 years to go back to London, or 4 years, but I ended up coming back again, being dragged back. Yeah, Krakow, even when I was back in London, which is my home city, Krakow always felt like home. Every time I came back to visit, it felt like coming home. So there is something about Krakow, something magical that sort of draws you back and makes you want to stay.
You're a joint citizen, aren't you? You have Polish citizenship.
Yes, yeah. So I have both, yeah, British citizenship by birth in Britain, and then Polish through my family.
Okay, so which you know, if you had to split that line down, okay, let's do the obvious test. England versus Poland, it's a football game. Yeah. Who do you support?
I was just about to say that's always the litmus test, and it still is. I still would support England. I mean, that's just from being brought up in England. I lived there the first 21 years of my life.
Correct answer.
Yeah, and I think that's something that will never change. Of course, I support Poland. I want them to win, but if the two ever met, and of course there have been a few, not World Cup or European Championship games as far as I remember, or maybe in group stages, but there haven't been any really big dilemmas in terms of a semi-final, a knockout game between the two. But I think, yeah, I would fall on the English side, although I wouldn't be unhappy if Poland won.
This is not my interview, but I will briefly mention that I went to go see England versus Poland. I can't remember which year it was, 2013, so it must have been a qualifier. And at Wembley, as a Poland fan, and I've never felt more disgraceful, more dishonourable in my entire life. Yeah. But that's possibly for someone else interviewing me. I apologise anyway. I want to ask though, how you've changed since 2004. If you look at the kind of English Daniel who came here, or British, sorry, in 2004, and where you feel relative to that now. I mean, obviously we all change as people over that time, but because you've been in this different culture.
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard question to answer because change happens so gradually that it's difficult to sort of take stock. And of course, everyone changes over a period of time. I mean, yeah, I moved here when I was 21, now I'm in my mid-30s, so you change naturally. But I mean, I have changed in the sense of understanding, engaging in Poland, Polish culture, and of course the fact that I have roots here makes that feel more important, and coming back to the city where generations of my family were living before, so you do feel that, and of course having to immerse myself in the language, trying to learn, which is a challenge but a really important one. There are lots of people who come here and either try and fail or don't even try to learn the language, but I always felt it was important, if I was going to live somewhere long term, that you have to be able to engage with the society around you.
Because there would be some people who would take issue with that. For example, there are some foreign commentators on Poland who are going to come to Notes from Poland who don't speak Polish, and they would say, listen, I still have a voice, I still have an opinion. I'm always a little bit uneasy with this, thinking that perhaps actually it's quite hard to really understand the country if you don't have a pretty good grasp of the language.
Yeah,
Would you agree?
I'd never want to deny someone their right to have an opinion, and especially someone who lives in Poland has every right to voice their opinion. But I do feel, from my personal perspective, that I wouldn't feel justified in personally in commenting on having opinions about the country if I didn't have the at least kind of intermediate level of language to understand what was going on around me, and to go dig a bit deeper than the kind of superficial level.
This brings us on, by the way, and this is a tradition we do at the start of the programme, but it brings us on very neatly to your personal item that you associate with Poland. So what is your item? Can you show us and explain it to us?
Asked me to bring a personal item. I was having a think, and I mean this book was one of the first books I was given when I started studying at the Jagiellonian University. And the course I studied there, the master's course, was... Yeah, of course, please have a look.
We can do some marking.
There's probably a few old notes in there.
Not very much written in here, actually.
The course was taught in English, but we had 90 minutes of Polish every morning, so that was something that the university really drilled into us, that we had to learn the language. And it was very good. It gave me a great foundation in the language, but also because it was university language courses, they were quite formal, so there was a great emphasis on the grammar, which I appreciate now. And this was part of it. This is a book about verb conjugations, which at the time was a nightmare, but now I quite appreciate. But what that meant was, now I appreciate knowing that grammar, but at the time, because Polish grammar for an English speaker, we don't really do grammar in schools in England. Polish grammar was so overwhelming that in some ways it at first hindered my ability to speak Polish, because you realise all of the endings that are necessary, all the different verb forms, and so it makes you worry about making mistakes or speak slowly because you're trying to get the endings right. So for the first year and a half, 2 years of learning, because I had this very sort of grammar-focused classes at the Jagiellonian University, it was quite difficult to make that breakthrough to speak. But at some stage, you just realise that you just have to make mistakes. And Poles are very accommodating. Poles really appreciate people who have come here and learnt the language and make an effort. And so you realise after some time that actually just speak, make mistakes, people will help you, correct you, and appreciate it.
Now, as you said, we're talking about commenting on Poland, and this is where we get on to notes from Poland, the hat that you're wearing particularly today.
Yeah.
And you and your co-editor or co-blogger, it started off as a blog, it's grown particularly quickly on Facebook. I think 5,000 followers you had in 2017, around mid-2017. It's now something around 30,000.
Yeah.
Filming as we are in March 2019. So that's actually really fast growth on Facebook. It's hard to do. For those who don't know, what is Notes from Poland? What are you two trying to achieve with it?
So Notes from Poland, started as a blog by my colleague, co-editor Stanley Bill from the University of Cambridge, who you've had on your programme before. Look for the link. He started it just as a way he's the director of the Polish Studies programme at the University of Cambridge, and he started this as a way of just offering some personal reflections on Polish culture, society, politics. And then I came on board about 2015, and we started to really focus not so much on the blog, but on social media. First on Facebook, more recently on Twitter, and it's developed into a kind of a news and commentary service. So every day we post multiple links to stories about what's happening in Poland, what's being said about Poland, providing first of all some kind of English translations and explanations of what's going on, but also trying to provide some of the context and background so that people can really understand, because there's an unprecedented amount of interest in Poland at the moment. It's becoming such an important country on the European stage and the global stage, and I think there's never been as much interest in Poland as now, but we feel a lack of reliable sources reporting on Poland for one reason or another, and so we've sought to try and fill that gap by presenting and explaining, commenting on what's happening here.
So the first thing you should do in the morning before brushing your teeth and after checking the first news is perhaps to go and see Notes from Poland, the first news obviously. But we're not competing because there's so much to talk about going on in Poland as well. So would you agree therefore that this lack of news? I'm very interested. When I came to Poland, it felt like a desert. There was 1 or 2 websites. Now there's been a big growth. Is Notes from Poland different from all those other platforms?
We certainly feel we are. You're absolutely right that 4 or 5 years ago you would struggle. There was the News PL, which is Radio Poland's website, which has been going for a long time. But in the last couple of years there has been this expansion of news services about Poland. One of the issues is, and I know I'm speaking through your programme for one of these news services, that although they have certain qualities and they do present news in a useful, accessible way. The problem with being linked to the state is that it always raises these questions about what can and can't be covered and about the independence of the reporting. And this is a wider debate that's happening in Poland at the moment as well about state media, which has been criticised a lot, especially in the last few years, for hewing towards the current government's line. And so what we seek to provide is something a bit different to that, something that's completely independent. We've done this completely voluntarily so far. We've never commercialized this. We don't raise money. We're not paid for doing this. Both of us have full-time academic jobs. So this is something that we do that we feel is different, that offers more of an insight, an independent voice about what's happening in Poland. And our philosophy is always to try and be as balanced and objective as possible, to try to show both sides and to give people outside Poland a deeper understanding of what's happening here.
Now, I know, just even looking at the number of articles and such the amount of work you get, that it's a lot of work. And there are probably some times you think to yourself, ugh, you know, the times in the, I don't know, family work or whatever gets in the way. You also get quite a lot of criticism, I think it would be fair to say, from people who just don't agree with whatever it is that's being posted there. Yeah. Does that criticism have an effect on you?
I wouldn't say... I take criticism on board. I enjoy being criticised, and sometimes I think criticism is justified, especially because we're not like the other news websites reporting on Poland. We're not funded, we don't have a big staff, we don't have a whole editorial process. This is something that two of us have done kind of our own volition as a part-time project. So it's inevitable that sometimes people will take issue with what we say, and we try to take that on board, and we've developed over the last few years to try to accommodate some of the criticism we've received. But on the other hand, inevitably people are going to criticise you. There's always going to be some people who disagree with what you say, with how you say it. So we listen to that, but and we try to take on board the constructive criticism, but then also there are some things you just have to justify only to yourself in how you do them. But I think in the past we did receive more criticism, but I think over time that's died down somewhat, even as we've become more prominent, because I think even people who may not agree with some of our opinions, may come from a different political perspective, I think people, generally reasonable people, do understand that we're trying to present both sides of the story. We're genuinely trying to explain what's happening in Poland. We don't have an agenda behind this other than to help outsiders to understand what's going on here. So I think most people who are reasonable, of goodwill, do recognise that. And so the criticism, some of the criticism we may have got 2 or 3 years ago when we were starting out, seems to have died down a bit now.
Oh, that's always nice to hear. Yeah. Let's talk, therefore, about Poland and its image globally. This is not something that Notes from Poland spends a lot of time on, because you talk about stuff that's going on inside. But yeah. You know, there's an ongoing discussion around the way we're understood in the world. I'm interested, do you think it's actually as negative as some people might assume? There's lots of angles that we can come at this from. And certainly when it comes to promoting Poland, I will of course declare I work for many different organisations that have a stake in promoting Poland globally. I'm just kind of curious where you see the challenges, maybe the opportunity as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think certainly, as I said before, there's an unprecedented amount of interest in Poland now. And so I think now it's more important than ever to be presenting Polish voices, Polish affairs to the world, to help people understand what's happening here. As you say, we don't deal with promoting Poland per se. We do try to explain, offer examples of Polish culture, what's happening here. So part of what we do will promote Poland, but that's not what we set out to do. But I do think it's important. And as you say, there have been challenges in the last few years, and there's been a lot of negative coverage of Poland relating to the government's historical policy, relating to rule of law, the criticism Poland's received internationally for that. So I think there absolutely are challenges, and I think that there has been some negative trends in the last few years. But on the other hand, there are also positive ones as well. Economically, Poland's been developing. It's just been granted developed market status. So there is a positive message that's going out there as well. It's not entirely negative.
What is Poland not doing that it should be doing to be better loved and understood by at least Western, European, American countries?
I think one big problem that characterises pretty much all of the various efforts, especially the state-led efforts to promote Poland abroad, is that too often their primary focus is on a domestic audience, that they do things to show Poles here that they're trying to promote Poland abroad, to project Poland's voice abroad. And if your primary goal is to give a message to your domestic audience, that means that the actual most important part of what you're trying to do, which is to speak to a foreign audience, is relegated to second place. And sometimes that can even mean what you do actually has negative consequences in terms of Poland's image abroad. So I do feel that if Polish institutions, organisations, the state, the government are genuinely interested in promoting Poland's image abroad, they need to think much more about what kind of message the world needs to hear and how that will be received abroad, rather than thinking primarily about a domestic audience at home. And you see this with a lot of the institutions that are promoting Poland abroad. So much of the material they put out on social media, online, is in Polish. So they're reporting to a Polish audience about what they're doing to promote Poland abroad, rather than focusing on what they should be doing, which is going out promoting Poland abroad in English and in other languages. So I think the priorities are often wrong in that regard.
We're both from a country, Britain, that regularly is #1 in the soft power league, so certainly punching well above its weight relative to the number of people living there. I just think, what's the unique bit of Poland that it can sell best? I mean, there have been many reports, many proposals, many strategies that have come and gone. But is there a sellable bit of this country that we're not selling at the moment?
I mean, I think one positive message, which I've mentioned already, is the economic development in Poland, which has been so rapid, so impressive in the last few years. And I think that creates a much more positive image than, for example, the focus on Polish history. I know history is incredibly important in Poland, and I understand why Poles feel it's important to help the world to understand and appreciate that history. But often, especially because that history inherently is quite negative because of the way Poland has suffered over the centuries, it's important, but it doesn't necessarily create a positive image of Poland abroad. And so a greater emphasis on the progress that Poland has made, its development, and also how in the last few years that development has been spread more widely. Many government policies in the last few years, the child benefit policies and so on, have given a huge boost to parts of Poland, to sections of society which previously were neglected, were falling behind. So I think Poland has a really positive socio-economic story to tell as well, which I think deserves much more attention in these efforts to promote the country.
If you had enough time, be it in your notes from Poland How or just Daniel yourself, what would you be doing? What additional work could you do to help this effort to promote Poland? Fantasy land here that you have enough time.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that's important is engaging more experts in promotion, marketing, branding from abroad who understand how people in other countries think. So I feel that a lot of the efforts made to promote Poland are run exclusively here in Poland by Polish offices staffed with Polish people who understand the Polish side of things, but of course are less familiar with the audience that they're trying to reach. And so I think there needs to be greater effort to understand the audiences, the markets that the message is intended for, and that means engaging much more with outside agencies, with people who have the expertise and the knowledge to shape a message that can have an impact outside Poland.
We're recording this a couple of weeks after a fairly difficult time, politically at least, between certain sections of politicians between Poland and Israel, things going back to history, as you just discussed. I wonder, there are still historical questions which are going to be debated and discussed as well. How can Poland best deal with its difficult, painful history, if it has to?
Yeah, like I said before, I understand I'm a historian, and I know how important, how painful, how significant Polish history is, and I think there are a few other countries that I'm aware of in which history is still such an integral part of modern day life, in political discourse, in the way that people speak about things, the references they make. History is still so important here. But what I think Poles need to do is, again, to empathise, to understand with outside audiences as well, that there are, of course, parts of Polish history that are great stories to be told. But also I think that Poles need to understand that while the history is important and they recognise that themselves, outside audiences aren't always going to be interested or aren't going to respond well to certain parts of Polish history. And especially when history becomes a contest about suffering. This is one of the problems that underlies the disputes between Israel and Poland, this kind of competitive victimhood between the two sides, between Jews who see themselves rightly as the primary victims of the Second World War, and Poles who feel that their own suffering has been neglected in part because of the focus on Jews. And in some ways this is an intractable problem, because every society, every country, every nation has its historical narratives which are deeply embedded and very difficult to challenge. And so in a sense, even though I'm a historian, and it may sound strange to say this, I wish there was less focus on history, certainly when Poland comes to projecting its message abroad. There are certain positive stories to be told, and this has been happening, like the story of the Polish code breakers during the Second World War and their collaboration with French and British mathematicians to break German codes. There are lots of positive stories, but this overwhelming focus on the negatives, on the martyrdom, the suffering, while it's understandably important to Poles, is often not the kind of message that's well received abroad.
Now, you just said you're a historian. I would say that Daniel's even become a little minor celebrity through the work he does from Notes from Poland, certainly amongst foreigners in Poland. Where would you like to take your career now? Will you always be in Poland, or could you see perhaps teaching elsewhere?
I think I'm settled indefinitely in Poland. So I mean, this is my home now, not here in Warsaw that I enjoy visiting, but down in Krakow.
Comes to see how they do it in the capital.
The big city. Yeah, I'm settled here indefinitely, and so I have as I said, I'm a historian. I have my academic teaching job in a university in Krakow, and that's where I see myself. But obviously, through the work I've done with Notes from Poland, I've also expanded beyond that to become more of a commentator on what's happening in Poland. And I think that's important too, because as I said, I feel that there is a lack of understanding in the world about what's happening in Poland, a lack of context, background, in-depth knowledge. And so that's something that I've tried to provide, and as we go forward, I'm going to try to do more of as well.
Well, we certainly look forward to seeing what Daniel and the Notes from Poland project does next. And of course, we recommend both the Notes from Poland and every article that you would find on The First News, a team of fantastic, by the way, Polish and international journalists creating content that almost nobody else has. But I'm not going to sell us too much, because you know what you need to do next, which is share this episode wherever you find it, be it Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, who knows. Make sure you send this to somebody who's interested in the Notes from Poland project and the subjects and topics that Daniel's talked about. And I'll see you again on the next episode of Heart of Poland.